It's October 27, 1962, the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean, Soviet submarine B-59 has been submerged for nearly 4 days. The air is toxic. The temperature inside is 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Men are collapsing from heat exhaustion. The carbon dioxide levels are approaching fatal. The captain can't surface. American destroyers are directly above him, dropping explosives into the water. He doesn't know if they're practice grenades or real depth charges. He doesn't know if war has already started. He's been cut off from Moscow for days. No communication, no orders, no news from the outside world. And now the American ships are getting closer. The explosions are getting louder. In the submarine's forward torpedo room sits a weapon unlike any other torpedo in the Soviet Navy. It's 10 feet long, 15 kilotons, a nuclear warhead. The captain believes war has begun. The political officer agrees. They want to fire. Soviet protocol requires unanimous consent from 3 officers to launch a nuclear weapon. 2 have voted yes. The 3rd officer, Vasily Arkhipov, must decide. If he votes yes, the submarine launches a nuclear torpedo at the American fleet. The Americans respond. The war escalates. Thousands of Soviet and American nuclear weapons are already on alert, ready to fire. If he votes no, he defies his captain. He defies military protocol. And if war really has started, he's condemning his submarine and crew to certain destruction without fighting back. The explosions are getting closer. The crew is staring at him, waiting. He has seconds to decide. 3 weeks earlier, 4 Soviet submarines left their base on the Kola Peninsula in northern Russia. Their designation? Project 641. NATO would call them Foxtrot class. Diesel-electric submarines, not the newest, not the quietest, but reliable. Each one carries 22 torpedoes. And each one carries something else, something secret. 1 torpedo in each submarine has been modified, fitted with a nuclear warhead, 15 kilotons, roughly the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The submarines have been ordered to sail to Cuba, to support the Soviet military buildup there, to demonstrate Soviet naval power in the Western Hemisphere. The orders are clear. Proceed submerged as much as possible. Maintain radio silence. Avoid detection by American forces. On submarine B-59, Captain Valentin Savitsky commands the boat. He's experienced, tough, a veteran of the Soviet Navy. The political officer aboard is Ivan Maslennikov. His job is to ensure the crew remains loyal, to represent the Communist Party's authority on the vessel. In matters involving special weapons, like the nuclear torpedo, his approval is required. And then there's the 3rd officer, Flotilla Commander Vasily Arkhipov. Arkhipov is 36 years old. He's aboard B-59 not as its captain, but as the commander of the entire 4 submarine flotilla. B-59 is his flagship, which means his rank is equal to Savitsky's, which means, under Soviet protocol, he has equal authority. This detail will matter more than anyone realizes. The submarines depart in early October. The journey is supposed to take several weeks. The plan is to stay deep, stay quiet, and reach Cuba without incident. But the world is about to change.
On October 14, 1962, American U-2 spy planes photographed Soviet medium-range ballistic missiles being installed in Cuba, nuclear-capable missiles, 90 miles from the United States. President Kennedy addresses the nation on October 22nd. He announces that the United States is imposing a naval quarantine, a blockade around Cuba. Any Soviet ships approaching Cuba will be stopped and searched. If they refuse, they will be turned back by force. The world holds its breath. The United States and Soviet Union are now in direct confrontation. Nuclear war has never been closer. And somewhere in the Atlantic, 4 Soviet submarines are still heading toward Cuba. They don't know about the blockade. They don't know about the crisis. They're running submerged, maintaining radio silence, exactly as ordered. They're sailing directly into the quarantine zone. And the American Navy is waiting. The American Navy knows the Soviet submarines are coming. American intelligence has tracked their departure. They know the general route. They know the submarines are diesel-electric, which means they have to surface periodically to recharge batteries and refresh air. But what the Americans don't know is that each submarine carries a nuclear torpedo. The U.S. Navy's orders are clear. Locate the Soviet submarines, force them to surface, identify them, do not let them reach Cuba. To do this, the Navy deploys a hunter-kill group, destroyers equipped with sonar, anti-submarine helicopters, and an aircraft carrier for air support. They're using a tactic called provocative surfacing. Here's how it works. Once they locate a submerged submarine, they drop small practice depth charges, grenades that explode underwater but aren't designed to damage the submarine, just scare it. The noise, the pressure, the repeated explosions are meant to signal, "We know you're down there. Surface now or we'll escalate." From the American perspective, this is aggressive but non-lethal signaling, a way to force Soviet submarines to surface without starting a war. But from inside the submarine, it's something else entirely. By October 27th, B-59 has been submerged for nearly 4 days. The submarine is in crisis. The diesel engines need air to run, which means the submarine must surface or snorkel to recharge batteries. But every time B-59 approaches the surface, American ships detect it and force it back down. The air inside the submarine is growing toxic. Carbon dioxide levels are climbing. The crew is breathing thick, stale air that burns their lungs. The temperature is unbearable. Diesel submarines generate enormous heat, and without surfacing to ventilate, the interior temperature has climbed upwards of 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Men are collapsing from heat exhaustion. The batteries are nearly depleted. If they die completely, the submarine loses all power. No propulsion, no lights, no life support. It becomes a metal coffin sinking to the ocean floor. And the submarine has lost radio contact with Moscow. Soviet naval communication relies on low-frequency radio transmissions that require the submarine to surface or extend an antenna close to the surface. But B-59 can't surface. American ships are everywhere. Which means Captain Savitsky has no idea what's happening in the world above. He doesn't know about the quarantine. He doesn't know about the missile crisis. He doesn't know if war has already started. All he knows is that American destroyers are hunting his submarine and they're dropping explosives. From inside B-59, the explosions sound like depth charges. Loud, bone-rattling concussions that slam through the hull. The lights flicker, equipment rattles, men grip handholds and pray the pressure hull doesn't crack. Savitsky has no way to know these are practice grenades. They sound real. They feel real. And after 4 days of being hunted, 4 days without communication, 4 days of heat and suffocating air and relentless pressure, Savitsky reaches a conclusion. War has begun. The Americans are attacking. The submarine is under assault. And Moscow hasn't sent orders because Moscow might not exist anymore. The captain gathers his senior...
No idea how close they came. They don't know that 2 officers voted to launch a nuclear weapon. They don't know that one man's refusal prevented it. Even the American fleet doesn't know. They tracked a Soviet submarine, forced it to surface, confirmed its identity, and watched it leave. Standard procedure. No one realizes that inside that submarine, 3 men nearly started World War III. October 27, 1962, is remembered as the most dangerous day of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The same day B-59 nearly launched its nuclear torpedo, other catastrophic near misses occurred. A U-2 spy plane is shot down over Cuba. The pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson, is lost. This is the first American casualty of the crisis. In Washington, military advisors push President Kennedy to respond with airstrikes. Another U-2 accidentally strays into Soviet airspace over Siberia. Soviet fighters scrambled to intercept. American F-102 fighters armed with nuclear air-to-air missiles scrambled to protect it. For several minutes, Soviet and American fighters are in close proximity, locked and loaded. At a missile base in Okinawa, American officers receive what appears to be a launch order. They begin unlocking nuclear missiles aimed at the Soviet Union. A supervisor demands verification and discovers the order was sent in error. October 27, 1962, is the day the world came closest to nuclear war, and most people never knew. The next day, October 28th, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev announces that the Soviet Union will dismantle the missiles in Cuba. President Kennedy agrees to remove American missiles from Turkey. The crisis de-escalates. The world steps back from the brink. But the near miss with B-59 remains classified. The Soviet Navy buries the incident. The Americans never learn how close the submarine came to launching. For decades, almost no one knows the truth. Savitsky and Maslennikov file their reports. They describe the mechanical difficulties, the loss of communication, the decision to surface. They do not mention the vote. They do not mention the nuclear torpedo. Arkhipov says nothing. He returns to duty. He continues his career in the Soviet Navy. He rises to the rank of vice admiral. He never speaks publicly about what happened aboard B-59. It's only in the 1990s, after the Cold War ends, that the story begins to emerge. Former Soviet naval officers start giving interviews. Archival documents are declassified. Historians piece together what happened. And the world learns. On October 27, 1962, a Soviet submarine nearly launched a nuclear torpedo at the American fleet. 2 officers voted yes. 1 said no. That one vote stopped it. The silly Arkhipov becomes known quietly as the man who saved the world. But Arkhipov himself never sought recognition. In interviews late in life, he was reluctant to discuss it. He said he was following his judgment, doing his duty,
making the best decision with the information he had. He passed away in 1998, largely unknown outside naval and academic circles. The story of B-59 forces an uncomfortable question. How many times did we almost end the world during the Cold War? How many other submarines were in similar situations? How many other commanders faced impossible choices with incomplete information? How many times did survival depend on one person making the right call? Arkhipov's decision wasn't about heroism, it was about doubt, about the willingness to question, to hesitate, to demand certainty before using a weapon that could end everything. He was exhausted. The air was toxic. The submarine was failing. His captain and political officer both wanted to launch. The protocol said he could vote yes. But he didn't. He chose to believe that war hadn't started. He chose to trust that the American explosions were signals, not attacks. He chose to surface and risk capture rather than launch and risk annihilation. And he was right. But what if the situation had been slightly different? What if one more practice grenade had hit closer? What if the heat had been 10 degrees higher? What if Arkhipov had been less experienced, less confident in his judgment? What if B-59 had been commanded by someone else? Someone who wasn't aboard, someone who didn't have equal authority to the captain? The vote would have been 2-1. Launch. The torpedo fires. The American fleet is obliterated. The war escalates. The survival of human civilization in October 1962 depended on a bureaucratic detail, the fact that Arkhipov happened to be aboard B-59 as flotilla commander, giving him equal authority and a vote. That's how thin the margin was. The Cuban Missile Crisis is remembered as a triumph of diplomacy. Kennedy and Khrushchev negotiating, back-channel communications, the world stepping back from the brink through rational decision-making. But the truth is messier. The crisis was filled with accidents, misunderstandings, near launches, and individuals making split-second decisions with incomplete information. B-59 wasn't the only close call. It was one of many, and we only know about the ones that were eventually declassified. How many others are still secret? How many times did someone, somewhere, make the choice that prevented catastrophe and no one ever found out? The systems we built during the Cold War, submarines with nuclear torpedoes, bombers on constant alert, missiles ready to launch in minutes, were designed to deter war, but they also created hundreds of opportunities for war to start by accident. And the only safeguard over and over again was individual human judgment. People like Arkhipov, people like Stanislav Petrov, people who chose doubt over certainty, hesitation over protocol, people who were willing to risk their careers, their lives, their reputations on the belief that this time, maybe, the alarm was wrong, the attack wasn't real, the war hadn't started. And every time, they were right. But they couldn't have known that when they made the choice. The silly Arkhipov stood in a submarine filling with toxic air, listening to explosions, watching two fellow officers vote to launch a nuclear weapon, and he said no. Not because he was certain he was right, because he wasn't certain they were under attack. And that doubt, that willingness to question, to wait, to demand more information before crossing the threshold, saved everything. On October 27, 1962, most of the world went about their day. People worked, children went to school, families had dinner. They didn't know that beneath the Atlantic, 3 men were voting on whether to start a nuclear war. They didn't know that one man's vote stood between them and annihilation. Arkhipov knew it. Savitsky knew it. Maslennikov knew it. and they carried that knowledge for the rest of their lives. The world continued because one man, in one moment, chose to doubt.